You know something I have been thinking about lately? Well, grab your coffee and come sit there here with me, and I'm going to tell you about it. I keep hearing people say not to cut your grass too early in the spring because the bees need the dandelions for food. Maybe you have heard that too. At first, I honestly did not think much about it because I just figured, well, maybe that is true. Then the more I heard people talking about it, the more curious I became. I started wondering, where did that idea even come from? And before I knew it, I found myself reading about dandelions and things and learning things I had absolutely no idea about. What surprised me the most is that as I was learning all of this, I suddenly started thinking about my childhood. When I was growing up, dandelions were never treated like some terrible weed in our family. My dad used to make salad with the dandelion leaves. I never thought twice about it at the time because it just seemed normal. People made food from what they had, and nobody acted like it was strange. Then I started thinking about my very precious aunt. She used to make dandelion wine. She loved gardening, talking, growing things, and making something meaningful out of ordinary life. Now, looking back, I realize how much people used what was around them and how connected they were to the seasons. So imagine my surprise when I found out that dandelions were actually brought to North America on purpose. I honestly had no idea. The very thing many of us spend money trying to destroy today was once considered valuable. Valuable enough to bring here intentionally because people used it for food. They used it for tea, wine, natural remedies, and even animal feed. That made me stop and think. When did something useful suddenly become unwanted? When did we decide this little yellow flower was the enemy? And then I learned something else that surprised me. The saying about bees is true, but only partly true. Dandelions actually do help bees, especially early in the spring when there are not many flowers blooming yet. Bees use the pollen and the nectar for food after the long winter, especially in colder places like Canada, where spring can feel like it takes forever to arrive. At the same time, I found out dandelions are not the whole story either. Bees do best when they have lots of flowers, flowering trees, clover, and wild plants to feed from. So dandelions matter, but they are part of something bigger. Still, I have to admit, it made me look at them differently. Then I found out something else that completely surprised me. Apparently, almost every part of a dandelion can be used. The leaves, which my dad used in salad, are edible. The younger leaves are milder, while the older ones can taste a bit more bitter. People put them in salads, soups, or cook them almost like spinach. The flowers are edible too, which made me smile because immediately I thought of my aunt and her dandelion wine. Some people also make tea, syrup, jelly, and even fritters from the flowers. Then there are the roots. And this one fascinated me because I had never really heard much about it growing up. People dry and roast dandelion roots to make a drink that tastes a bit like coffee. During hard times or when coffee was expensive, people sometimes used dandelion root instead. For generations, dried roots were also used in traditional herbal remedies, especially for digestion and what people believed supported liver health. Even today, researchers are still studying some of its properties, which I find fascinating because it makes me wonder how much older generations quietly knew that we forgot to value. I even learned that the name dandelion comes from a French phrase meaning lion's tooth. Because of the jagged shape of the leaves? Who knew? And then this tiny little fact completely charmed me. Did you know dandelions actually open and close with sunlight and weather? The flower opens during the day and closes again at night, or when it is rainy or cloudy. I had absolutely no idea. Something about that made me smile, because it feels like even this tiny flower lives according to rhythm and seasons in a way we sometimes forget to do ourselves. Another thing I found interesting is that dandelions actually help the soil. The roots grow deep and help loosen pack earth while pulling nutrients upward. So now I am sitting here thinking, this poor little plant has been feeding bees, feeding people, helping the soil, making wine and salads, and somehow we turned around and called it a weed. And then, of course, there is the memory I think so many of us probably share. That fluffy white puffball. Tell me I'm not the only one. I remember picking them as a child and blowing those little white seeds into the air while making a wish. Somewhere along the way, I taught my children to do it too. Then my grandchildren, and now, believe it or not, I still get my great-grandsons to do it, the same thing. There is something sweet about that to me. Something simple, something human, something that somehow survived through generations without anybody needing a screen or instructions or a fancy reason. You just picked it, made a wish, blew it, smiled. The more I looked into all of this, the more I realized this conversation stopped being about dandelions. Somewhere along the way, it became about memory. It became about old knowledge. It became about the little quiet things people once knew that never seemed important enough to write down because everyone simply knew them. Nobody called it wellness. Nobody called it sustainability. And nobody called it living intentionally. People simply lived that way. They used what they had. They paid attention to the seasons. They wasted less. They passed little things along without realizing. Those little things might someday become memories, someone treasured. And now when I see a patch of dandelions, I do not think I will ever see them quite the same again. I think about my dad making salads. I think about my aunt making her wine. I even think about bees waking up after winter. I think about the children making wishes and little hands blowing white fluff into the wind. And it honestly makes me wonder what other ordinary things we stopped paying attention to that maybe mattered more than we realized. I would really love to hear your stories because I have a feeling many of you grew up with things like this too. Did your family use dandelions, grow something unusual, make remedies, or pass down little bits of wisdom that stayed with you? Share them with me because I think there is something really special about keeping these memories and stories alive. And if conversations like this feel a little like sitting down for coffee together, I would love to have you stick around.